our semester. In Module 2, we cover the biological bases of behavior. In this module, we're covering 3 chapters. Chapter 2 on behavioral neuroscience, Chapter 3 on sensation and perception, and Chapter 5 on consciousness. In Chapter 2 on behavioral neuroscience, there are 4 basic sections to this chapter that you should focus on. The structure and function of the cells of the nervous system. That means the neurons and how they work. The divisions of the nervous system and how each of those work. By divisions, I mean the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, and how we're able to gather information from our environment through our nervous system and integrate it into something that the brain can understand, and then guide our behavior based on that integration. The third part of the chapter focuses on the parts of the brain and what they do, and so we'll talk about both cortical structures, that means the cortex, or the 4 lobes of the cortex, and how each lobe controls sensation and perception of a different aspect of our functioning. For example, the occipital lobe controls vision, the temporal lobe controls hearing. And then underneath the cortex, we have subcortical structures, or brain stem structures, that control many other functions. For example, our balance and coordination in the hindbrain, primarily in the cerebellum, our sleep and wakeful cycle through reticular formation and reticular activating system. We have a reward center in our midbrain that makes things feel good to us, like eating when we're hungry, and certain drugs of abuse activate that reward center. We have parts of our forebrain that control learning and memory and emotion, and so definitely focus on those parts of the brain and what they do and how they make us the people that we are today. And then the other fourth part of that behavioral neuroscience chapter, some people call the chemistry of psychology, or the neurotransmitters. And I usually focus on 6 key neurotransmitters in this chapter, really 7. Glutamate, the main excitatory neurotransmitter. GABA, the main inhibitory neurotransmitter. Dopamine, which controls a variety of functions. Serotonin, which many people have heard of before. Norepinephrine, and the endorphins. And acetylcholine. Sorry, I knew I was forgetting one. Acetylcholine, which controls memory. So definitely take a look at those. In our chapter on sensation and perception, we learn how each of our sense organs especially functions to allow us to detect certain types of environmental stimuli. Our eyes, for example, allow us to detect electromagnetic radiation in the form of light, and allows us to perceive things. Fun part of this chapter is perception, in my opinion. I like this section on how we take those visual and auditory and all of those physical stimuli from our environment and then interpret them to make them personally meaningful, and that's the perception aspect. Your discussion allows you to choose from actually 3 choices. The first choice is looking at brain laterality, right brain, left brain, in terms of cortical function that you'll learn about in Chapter 2. The second option is to do some visual illusions and tell us about your experience with those and why you think we sometimes succumb to these visual illusions, perceptual illusions. And then from our Chapter 5 on consciousness, we talk about drugs and drugs of abuse. And so that third option for the discussion is on drug abuse and addiction, and your opportunity to share some of your thoughts with that based on what we read. Some other aspects of consciousness. In our consciousness chapter, we talk about what is consciousness and how does consciousness work. And then we focus primarily on 3 altered states of consciousness. Drugs of abuse, as they produce an altered state of consciousness. Sleep and dreams, and how sleep and dreams produce an altered state of consciousness. And then hypnosis. There's a little section in our chapter on hypnosis, although that hypnosis I don't think is a major focus of our chapter this summer, just because we are condensing some material. So really focus primarily on those 2 altered states, drugs of abuse and sleep and dreams. The homework assignment this week gives you the opportunity to actually make a video to explain to somebody the parts of the brain and what they do. So you're limited to 5 minutes in the video, but try to incorporate as many parts of the brain as you can, or perhaps neurotransmitter systems, because that's relevant to this chapter too. There are 3 practice quizzes from this chapter. There's a practice quiz over chapter 2 on behavioral neuroscience, a chapter quiz on practice quiz on chapter 3 on sensation and perception, and one on chapter 5 on consciousness, and then the module test will have questions from all 3 chapters. So have fun. This is one of my favorite modules of the semester. Feel free to email or call me if you have any questions. Have a great week.